Welcome to this second video on the Joyceway Focus 3. Last video we covered the stand, assembling the fin and bulb and sealing the deck eyes. This time we'll start with the hatch, which is the other major consideration in making the boat watertight. To make the hatch, the material needs to be 3mm thick. I had some 3mm styrene foam sheet, which is quite dense, so I made my hatch from this. But any 3mm material will do, and certainly a clear plastic would work fine. Just cut the hatch so it fits into the slot and round out the underside edges to suit. Note, the longer edges require minimal rounding. There will likely be an issue with the raised screw on the servo arm. On the Focus 2, I was able to file and ground a little off the base of the fitting on the servo arm, as well as the screw itself, so that it just fitted underneath the cover. With the Focus 3, the screw still protruded high enough to foul the hatch. In which case I routed a slot which the screw could move freely in, and then glued a piece of hips on top. The hatch can be fixed with PVC tape to make the boat watertight. Once the tape is applied, I blow through the drain hole to ensure the boat is almost airtight. You will always get a tiny amount of air escaping through the rubber bellows. And what's more, you can put your hand over the eyes and you will feel if there is any air escaping. I attached my rubber plug using a piece of string and epoxy. After drilling a hole in the rubber plug and running a string through it, I put knots in both ends of the string, place the string on the inside of the gunnel of the boat and apply epoxy. It is important to use fast setting epoxy so it will not run before it sets, and ensure you leave enough string on so that the plug can be easily inserted into its hole. I upgrade my battery and use a more solid plug to connect that battery. I use a lithium-ion battery rated at 850 milliamp hours. This battery comfortably operates the boat for an entire day of sailing. Changing the plug is straightforward, requiring a little soldering. But be careful with the battery plug to ensure no inadvertent short circuits occur, as this can damage the battery. If you opt to upgrade the battery, you will need to file some of the plastic off the electrics cradle to let the battery sit inside. I then use a small piece of Velcro to hold the battery in place. I do not use the radio provided as part of the kit. I choose instead to use a FlySky i6 because I am familiar with that radio and it provides additional functionality over the kit radio. I run my radio controlled yachts on a single radio, as the FlySky has the capacity to run up to 20 different models. Each model needs its own receiver, however. The first step is to replace the receiver in the boat and then bind it to the radio. It is important to select a free model on the radio, and then I name it accordingly. You can then bind the receiver to the radio, and this is done by placing the binding plug in the appropriate position on the receiver, turning on the power to the boat, at which time the receiver should blink quickly. To prepare the radio for binding, ensure all switches are in the up position and the left stick is all the way down. You then press the bind button on the radio, and while holding this button down, turn the radio on. The radio will then bind to the receiver, and the receiver will then slowly flash. Remove the binding plug, then turn off the radio, and finally turn off the boat. Every time you power up the system, from then on, start with the radio and then turn on the boat. When fitting the rudder, I use liberal amounts of Vaseline to ensure the tiller arm and its fittings are well protected. At this stage, do not tighten the push-pull rod at either the servo or the tiller end. Turn on the radio and then the boat. The servo will find its neutral or centre position. Check that the servo arm is going straight across the boat. If necessary, you can lift the servo arm off the servo and rotate it to get it as close as you can to running across the boat. You can then adjust the final alignment using the rudder trim tab switch. This is a switch immediately below the rudder on the radio. Once the servo arm is correctly aligned, you can now tighten the push-pull rod at the servo end. After this, slide the tiller fitting onto the push-pull rod loosely. You can now fit the rudder. Again, I use liberal amounts of Vaseline. You should also note that there is a slot in the rudder shaft. Just ensure this takes the locating screw on the tiller arm fitting. I then align the rudder with the boat's fin using a long steel rule. Obviously any straight edge will do, and once the rudder is aligned, just tighten the push-pull rod using the locating screw. I adjust my rudder setting on the radio so that it is less sensitive when initially moved from its neutral position. This is one of the big advantages of being able to use a FlySky radio. The two booms need to be prepared before rigging. The main boom includes the vang and a swivel so that it can rotate on the mast. The first step is to remove the two bearings as shown. I use a small punch and a slight tap will dislodge the bearings. I then coat them with Corrosion X and then apply Vaseline on top of that. I also take the vang apart and do the same with all metal components before reassembly. Although it is not mentioned in the parts list, the Dragon Force 95 bearings actually fit into the mast step on your Focus, so you should probably get a few as spares. Every month or so I take the boom off the boat and clean the bearings and the vang. If you miss a month, then it is likely you will need to replace the bearings, so it is a good idea to have some with your spares. Just reassemble the boom and wrap it in something to stop the Vaseline getting onto other parts or the sails. This completes the second video in the series. In the third and final video we will cover the rigging of the boat.